tries to go to Utanapishtim out at the edge of the world. He says, hey, I want immortality. How did you do it? And Utanapishtim says, who's going to convene the gods for you, right? I did it because I survived the flood, but who's going to do that for you? Nobody. So, but hey, as a consolation prize for making it all the way out here, there's this plant of life that you can get. And of course, as I say plant of life, the listeners are like, oh, okay, that sounds familiar. Yeah. Well, he goes down and he gets it, and it's really great. And he's on his way back to Uruk to test it out on an old man to see if it works. And he stops by a pool of water to take a bath. And what do you know? A snake comes along and steals it, right? And it's this lost chance, so close, yet so far away, of immortality.
That Yahweh, speaking to the other divine beings, says, look, they've eaten from this tree now. What happens if they also eat from the tree of life and live forever? And because we can't have that happening, we have to get them out.
Gentlemen, we're talking about a very controversial topic. It's been debated since this literature has been put on scrolls, on papyri, on animal skins, looking at the Gnostics. I'm talking to Dr. Kip Davis. I'm talking to Dr. Joshua Bowen, and we're going in head first. Did God lie in the Garden of Eden? And is there any other evidence that we can look to that might help us answer that question? And does God have a track record of potentially doing this kind of stuff in the literature? Because it's obvious the reason you guys are wanting to say this is you hate God, you want to suppress the truth and unrighteousness.
Absolutely.
Just want to sin.
Just want to sin.
Want to keep sinning.
Keep sinning.
That's the big thing.
I stand corrected. I stand corrected. Take this and run with it.
Yeah, I think probably a good place to start with this is just trying to set the stage for the debate, at least as it concerns the Garden of Eden. You know, when you read through the passage, when you read through the narrative, Yahweh gives this command to Adam and Eve and says essentially, if you partake of this fruit in that day, the text is very clear. In that day, you will, in fact, die, using the infinitive. Absolutely. Yep.
Yes.
And of course, historically, this has been an interpretive problem because, in fact, they do not die. And so, scholars and theologians, philologists, everybody under the sun has wrestled with this. What is it that's going on? Should we understand in a more theological sense that Yahweh meant that he would die spiritually? Yes. There'd be a separation.
And this is where you get some very, very clever apologetic explanations for what's going on here. The way the emphatic is expressed in the Hebrew is to use the verb "you will die" and then to repeat it using a form called the infinitive absolute, which adds the force and the emphasis to it. But something that Christian apologists have said often is the use of the two verbal forms there indicates a physical death on the one hand and a spiritual death on the other. I mean, this is something I was told when
so in Exodus 21, they will be put to death. It's a spiritual death that they'll be put to death.
You're all dead at that point. It's not just
Oh my!
But that's the kind of thing.
Yes.
That we're dealing with. Sorry.
No, I think it was excellent.
But the story then continues, right? God, or specifically Yahweh God, says, you will surely die on the day that this happens. The snake, or the Nachash, the serpent, comes along and says to Eve, did God say that you are not even allowed to touch the fruit? And she said, no. She said, we can eat from, or are you not allowed to touch any fruit?
Like hath God said,
has he said this? She says, no, we're allowed to touch everything, but we can't eat of just this one fruit. And he says, he's only told you this because he knows in the day that you eat of it, this is the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Yep.
In the day that you shall eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will become like God.
Yep.
And then this is sort of the ironic thing here. I mean, we'll get to Yahweh in a minute, but much of the apologetic is constructed around this idea that the Nachash, the snake, is a liar.
Right.
But the snake is the one who says, in the day that you eat it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Eve takes of the fruit, she eats of it, she gives it to her husband, he eats of it. And then the text says, in that moment, their eyes were opened and they saw that they were naked.
Yep.
So it's such an obvious misstatement, because in this instance, the serpent was being absolutely truthful.
Yeah.
And yet he gets blamed for lying all the time.
Yeah. And that has led, obviously, to the theological problem, right? You can't have Yahweh lying, right? That doesn't no good, right? And so how do we engage with this? How do we address it? Well, I think, and certainly, we're not the first to think about this. There was an article that was published in Sam Gringus's Festschrift, a couple years ago, I think it's 2019, 2020, something like that. Lying gods or something like that.
We might not even be the first ones to say this on YouTube.
Yeah, that's perhaps. But we're the best to say it. That's the key. Mark that down. And I'm here to help. So, but part of the problem here is being able to understand from a historical critical standpoint, where does this story come from? And this creates the bigger problem, right? If you're coming at this like a fundamentalist evangelical, where the story comes from, is it a polemic? None of those things end up being like an important thing to talk about, primarily because like this is handed down from on high, and this is the inspired and inerrant word of God. But as we sit here and as scholars engage with this in Pentateuchal studies, they're looking for things like, okay, how can other ancient Near Eastern mythological traditions inform our understanding of the story? And so like maybe you want to talk about Ron Hendel's article where he talks about the arc of the narrative in Genesis 1 through 11 and the movement towards civilization and both.
Yeah, one of the things that we see within the story from Genesis 1 to 11 is a development. Almost, there's a development within the narrative that is moving away from the city, moving away from urbanization. It's very often misunderstood by modern readers of the Bible that the Garden of Eden is like an untouched wilderness, or like a return to nature sort of story, and that's just not the case at all. This is a landscaped urban garden. This is a symbol of civilization. So in that first movement, you have Adam and Eve exiting this urban masterpiece. They're moving away from the city. Just to give a run through of how this works, Cain is the first murderer in the Bible, and he's also the first to build a city. You have the story of the Tower of Babel, which is a story of urbanization and metropolization. If that's a word, I'm not even sure if it is, but that's kind of what's going on here. And the effort on the part of God is to put an end to that and disperse people away from the city. You have this genealogy that follows directly after that in Genesis chapter 10, which features Nimrod as the founder and the builder of all these great cities. These are Mesopotamian, Assyrian cities, which are looked to as places of great evil. And then, of course, Abraham, who is the first of the patriarchs. What does he do? He leaves the city of Ur, and then he spends the rest of his life wandering as a nomad through this region in Canaan. And this is deliberate, pointing out that there is a deliberate movement in this story away from the city. And this contrasts very nicely with what you read in certainly in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh begins. This is the great story. Did it come out of Sumer originally, or was it?
I mean, it was originally a group of like individualized Sumerian texts.
Yeah. Okay, but in the text that we have now, it begins with with Gilgamesh surveying the walls of his city Uruk, and marveling at the greatness of his creation, this wonderful urban paradise. And then much of the rest of the story follows. It follows these same sorts of themes through his good friend Enkidu. Enkidu is a wild man who comes into the city of Uruk and becomes civilized.
Yeah.
And then they go on these adventures together, Enkidu and Gilgamesh. And after Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh returns to Uruk, and the Epic of Gilgamesh ends basically the way it began, with him coming back after looking for the meaning of life and for eternity and for a greater purpose. He ends up back at Uruk and walking around the city once again and surveying the walls and going, what a marvelous place. The message within the Epic of Gilgamesh is that the city is the heart of civilization. It is the great human achievement. And we see that kind of being undone in these first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis, with this consistent movement away from the city, away from urbanization, into the wilderness.
And to sort of maybe nuance that for the listener, it's a movement that Yahweh is having to enforce, because what people are trying to do is centralize.
Yeah.
They're trying to move toward the city. So as you're talking about with the tower and the city, because the story is actually like the city and the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
And this is, of course, Babylon. So the people are trying to go there. But the point, as you're pointing out very eloquently, is that there is this movement that the people are trying to make toward the city, but that's bad. That's the point. Whereas, if you think about the Epic of Gilgamesh, you have Enkidu. He has sex with Shamhat for 6 days and 7 nights, becomes human, which is, moving away from what we see with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. But that movement toward the city is good. the movement toward the city in the Genesis account is bad. So the whole point of us going into some detail, and Derek, I see you saying, come on, we gotta go faster.
I would never.
Is that it's a polemic, right? The narrative is engaging with earlier Mesopotamian mythology. So,
and by the way, just a short plug, this is what I was really wanting to jab in, is that both of you have a course on MVP courses. Kip, you have an 18 lecture thorough, like, that is just, it goes everywhere about just the religion of the ancient Israelites. And there's so much more. I don't think the title even encompasses what we're really trying to get. There's so much. And then you're also going to be launching a course as we're recording. We're wrapping this course up now on mythologies that influence the Bible.
Yeah.
And it's in this vein. So there's a short plug. You can also get the books, subscribe to Kip's YouTube channel. All the links are down in the description. So I hope you go there.
Yeah, and I think this is what makes it so important, because when we come to a crux, an interpretive crux in these passages, it's so important, I think, to be able to look back at other ancient Near Eastern mythology, because we see this pattern, not just in Genesis 1 through 11. You see it in Isaiah, you see it in the Psalms, see it in Job, like you see it everywhere, where they're interacting and polemicizing with and polemicizing ancient Near Eastern mythology. And so how do we see this in the Garden of Eden story? And, Bruce Wells has a monograph that should be coming out here, I'm assuming in the next couple of years, where, as you were talking about, the Genesis Garden of Eden scene is actually in line with like a temple garden. And this is an important aspect of this. But what we see is there's the theme in the Garden of Eden story that is very common in ancient Near Eastern mythology, and that is a loss at a shot at immortality. So we see it in the Epic of Gilgamesh, with Gilgamesh tries to go to Utanapishtim out at the edge of the world. He says, hey, I want immortality. How did you do it? And Utanapishtim says, who's going to convene the gods for you, right? I did it because I survived the flood. But who's going to do that for you? Nobody. But hey, as a consolation prize for making it all the way out here, there's this plant of life that you can get. And of course, as I say plant of life, the listeners are like, oh, okay, that sounds familiar. Yeah. Well, he goes down and he gets it, and it's really great. And he's on his way back to Uruk to test it out on an old man to see if it works. And he stops by a pool of water to take a bath. And what do you know? A snake comes along and steals it. Right. And it's this lost chance, so close, yet so far away, of immortality. And so scholars have noted these things all along. There is another story that describes this. And if I start waxing on too long, you just cut me off. It's the story of Adapa. And Adapa is this ancient sage. He's got magical like wisdom and knowledge and understanding that's very important to Babylonian and Assyrian culture. And he is the servant of Ea, or Enki. And he's out one day on his boat, and he's fishing to catch fish as offerings for his master Ea. And this south wind blows and capsizes his boat, and he spends all day in the water, almost drowns. And he's so ticked off that he uses this magical knowledge that he has of these incantations, and he curses the south wind and breaks its wing. And so the south wind doesn't blow for 7 full days, which causes all these problems in the land. Well, the sky god Anu catches wind of this and summons Adapa to come up and give an account. So come up to heaven and give an account for himself. And Ea says to Adapa, hey, look, when you go up there, he's going to offer you the clothing, a new clothing and oil to anoint yourself. And he's going to offer you the food of death and the drink of death. You can take the garment and the oil, but don't eat or drink any of it because it's going to kill you. So Adapa's okay, cool. So he goes up there. Anu offers him, here's food and drink, but it turns out that it's the food and drink of immortality, of life. And being the faithful servant of Ea, Adapa says, no, all good. And Anu laughs at him and says, whoa, poor humanity. It was a missed opportunity at immortality. And scholars have debated this. Assyriologists have debated this. Like, did Enki, was Ea lying? right? Or did he not know? Did Anu, like, was he so moved by the thing that Adapa did that he actually changed it from offering death to offering life? Well, I think that the Eden narrative, in conjunction with the Adapa narrative, casts light on this, right? And I'll shut up so you can talk about it if you want. But there's a definite connection here between there are parallels. Yahweh giving a command and Ea giving a command, and both of them are lying.
Yeah, pretty clear. I think it's important to point out here, one of the things in this story that I think sheds significant light onto Yahweh's motivation at the outset is how he responds to the man and the woman after they have eaten from the fruit of the tree of the good of the knowledge of good and evil. When Yahweh can't find them in the first place in the garden, he has to call out, "Where are you guys? Why are you hiding?" And they came out and they said, "We were hiding because we were naked and ashamed." And his response, I think, is very telling. Yahweh says, "Who told you you were naked? Did you eat from the tree of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil?" So we know right there, based on the information that he's provided in his reaction, that this is totally different from what he said to them when he instructed them not to eat from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I hate saying it over and over again, but I also hate it when people call it an apple.
Right.
It just pisses me off. But I think that's a super important part of this story, which shows that something within Yahweh's plan has gone awry, and it's connected to what he told them in the first place, which was, I don't see any way around this problem, that he had given them inaccurate information to keep them away from the tree.
In my question, just again, for those who may be slow like me, why do you think, if we're assuming that, let's just assume that's the most accurate understanding, and it makes a lot of sense that it is. He doesn't want them to eat. Why does he not want them to? He wants to keep them in their infant, innocent state. But why? What problem does that pose for Yahweh?
So I think maybe something that we were talking about this earlier, and I think something that you really need to touch on is this connection in the Adapa myth. You talked yesterday about this connection between the food of life and the food of death, and the reason why Ea thought it was so important that Adapa not eat from the food.
Yeah. It's so, to sort of preface that, if we remember the polemic nature of what's going on in the primeval history in Genesis 1 through 11, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, remember the pinnacle, the best is civilization, right? Being clothed, eating bread, drinking beer, right? Being in the city. This is where it's at, right? And where you don't want to be is in the Enkidu state, right? That's running with the animals, free, naked, innocent boy, roaming the countryside, right? We don't want that. And that's why you have that positive movement toward it. The opposite is the case in the Genesis narrative, because you want the state of innocence. That's what Yahweh's trying to maintain. So to answer this question, or to try to get a hint at it, if we go back to the Adapa myth and we wrestle for a minute with why it is that Ea might lie. And Steve Tinney, who's an Assyriologist up at University of Pennsylvania, has a great lecture on this. And what he suggests, and I think has become a pretty reasonable solution to this, is that there is this secret knowledge that Adapa has. And it's a knowledge that not everybody can have, but humanity needs it. And that's the important point. And if you think back to the figure Utnapishtim, who is the flood survivor, what Gilgamesh has to do in order to get this secret knowledge that Utnapishtim has is he has to go to the end of the world where Utnapishtim is, which begs the question, why is it that Utnapishtim is at the edge of the world? Why isn't he among humanity? And it's because he received eternal life from the gods. And once that immortality is granted, there's this tradition where the human who has become like this semi-divine being, whatever, who has immortality, has to be taken and placed away from humanity. And so what Tinney suggests here is that knowing that, had Adapa been granted this eternal life, this immortality by partaking of the food and drink of life, that he would have had to have been removed from humanity, which would have removed this sort of Promethean knowledge that humanity was granted. And so Ea wants to keep that knowledge with humanity. And so that's why he lies and says, hey, don't do it, because I know that if you do, you'll stay away. So if we bring that understanding back to the Genesis Garden of Eden narrative, it could shed some light on what's going on, because what Yahweh does not want is this knowledge. He wants people to remain in this state of innocence.
Yes.
And the serpent, who is supposed to be the bad character here, it's sort of like you can almost think of this, I suppose, in a sense, like Yahweh is a protective parent who knows that the kid can't really handle all the information right now, and so it's like, look, just don't do this. You'll die if you do, right? And the serpent's going, oh, you won't. Believe me, you won't. This is what's going to happen. Though you're going to get this knowledge, you'd be like the gods, and Yahweh knows that this is a bad state, a state that He doesn't want. And so I'll shut up after this. But what I think is happening here, and again, this is not just Josh talking, is that Yahweh is saying, you're going to die. Don't partake of this fruit. Because He wants the state of innocence to remain. And the serpent wants this knowledge to come to humanity, much like Prometheus. And so Prometheus, of course, gets punished for it. And in the same way, the serpent gets punished for it. Yeah. And this leads to the goal of Yahweh trying to keep humanity from having this knowledge. And that leads then into, and I'll let you tell that part, about why it is then, after they have partaken, why does Yahweh not allow them to partake of the tree of life?
This is the other important part of the story, and it's kind of scholars have also wrestled not just with this question of how to interpret Yahweh's words and His motivation and His actions here. But one of the other elements of the story that has puzzled scholars is the tree of life. It is mentioned kind of right at the beginning when the narrator is painting the picture of the garden and what it looks like. And it's sort of an offhanded comment where he just says, and the tree of life was in the middle of the garden as well. And that's the last that you hear of it. Adam and Eve eat from the tree of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And then, they are cursed at that point. The serpent is cursed. And then it's only after that Yahweh, speaking to the other divine beings, says, look, they've eaten from this tree now. What happens if they also eat from the tree of life and live forever. And because we can't have that happening, we have to get them out. They have to get out of the garden. So it certainly seems like the same sort of thing is going on here, where by eating of the tree of life and achieving immortality, does that then remove Adam and Eve from this human realm in the same way that it removed Utnapishtim, in the same way that it seems that Adapa is in danger of that happening to him? Is that the same thing that's going on here? I think another important aspect of this too is these stories are also instructive on what is the difference between a god and a man. How do we tell the difference between these beings? And bear in mind as well, within this ancient mindset, the gods were not always, they were like Supermen, but they very much looked like people and took on the characteristics of people. So, being able to distinguish gods from people was something that you needed to be able to do. So I think this is playing out in this Genesis story as well. In all of these myths, there's a concentration on this idea of the acquisition of knowledge, wisdom, and the acquisition of eternal life, immortality. There's also stuff going on there with sex and nakedness that we don't really have the time to get into, but which is also all very, very interesting. But within this Genesis story, it feels like humankind they've taken a step towards immortality, but they're not quite there. They're not all the way there until they have finished the journey by eating from the tree of life and achieving immortality. So getting them out is a way of ensuring that they're not part of this divine plane. But I think also this kind of sets up the rest of the biblical narrative, whereby human beings are distinct from everybody else on the earth. They're not animals, but they're also not gods. So they're kind of there in the middle somewhere, right? They know good and evil, but they haven't achieved immortality. They haven't hit that divine plane.
Yeah.
That just brings me back to what is the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Because it comes down to that when you have this earlier polemic, or earlier, not even polemic, just narrative of Adapa or Utnapishtim, whoever, civilization gets this knowledge, and it's really civilization that is that is that knowledge of good and evil. It seems, and like you said, the garden seems to be the pinnacle of God's temple. It has a lot of temple language almost. So it seems like this is the pinnacle of that kind of civilization. He wants you to be dumb and not know this, Adam and Eve. But they eat it. Now they know, we've got a problem here. Houston, we have a problem. And it seems like it's trying, while it's reworking that previous story, there seems to be a little bit of a hiccup here, in my opinion. It's trying to reverse the roles completely, but it doesn't quite make the same amount of sense as it did when you look at the earlier narrative. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that part of the issue here, right, is that these are also, amongst other things, etiological myths, right? So they're trying to say, why is there pain in childbirth, right? Why is it hard to grow shit out of the ground? Like,
why are we embarrassed when we're naked?
Right, exactly. Like, why is this a problem? And so then the question is, why do we die? Yeah. Right? And it's this notion that I think that allows like apologists and theologians to sort of massage this a little bit and go, well, see, they do start dying. Look, in Genesis 5, it's like, and he died, and he died, and he died. It's like, yeah, okay. But that doesn't jive with the text, because the text is very clear. In the day, bayom, in the day that you eat, which is like this right here. And so I think what's happening here is, yes, there's a tension, I think, in the narrative itself, where the writer has to, these are the only two humans. Right, so they have to, at the end, have they have to be mortal, right? Because you can't have immortals leaving the garden. Like, it doesn't work that way. So because the etiology doesn't work that way. So yeah, I mean, I think there probably is some tension in the narrative, but I think that's also one of the beautiful things about polemics is they don't always have to have this one-to-one correspondence. And there can be that tension because they're making theological points. And trying to respond to other theological points in doing so.